Welcome to Nightmares Incorporated, where our goal is to make your sleep anything but restful. So sit back, relax, and enjoy tonight's tale, entitled The Harvest of Graydon. March 25th, 2025. It's been 3 days since the fog showed up just outside of town. Within those 3 days, 320 people have gone missing from Graydon. The phones quit working yesterday morning, same with the internet. As far as we can tell, there's no way for us to contact the outside world and tell them what's going on here. The mayor's called a town meeting tonight, showed up in person to invite me to come. I said I would, but seeing as work is slow right now, I figured I might as well keep an account of what's been happening, just in case the rest of us go missing too. Maybe someone will find this journal eventually, and then there'll at least be a record of what happened to us. Now, I'm not much of a writer, but I'll do my best. In case I'm not around to introduce myself, my name is Earl Hendricks. No relation to the musician. I own the only gas station in Graydon, Wyoming, along with the motel. As impressive as I'm sure that must sound, these properties were handed down to me from my father, as his father handed them to him. My family was one of the first groups to settle in this part of Wyoming, and the Hendrickses, along with the Graysons, are kind of the cornerstone of this little slice of heaven. I have employees that run the motel, which is pretty slow this time of year, and gets a shot in the arm during the summer when the city folk come to stay and play mountain climber. I've never really cared for the tourists much, even when I was younger. I surely appreciate the income they bring with them, and I have to admit they do provide a chuckle every once in a while when they get themselves all jacked up by a wild animal that they took it upon themselves to try and pet. But I'm always happy to see them leave come fall. I'm a small town boy through and through, and have never trusted strangers too much. I've always enjoyed working the gas station though, which is why I continue to run it 6 days a week, even at the age of 65. Only allowing an employee to man the store alone on Sundays. Of course, the tourists come to the gas station as well, and I appreciate the business, but it's the regulars that give me real enjoyment in my work. Graydon, Wyoming is a small town, even by Wyoming standards. Population of 643, there's very few people in town that I don't know, which is how I like it. People in the city will never understand what it's like to have a community where everyone is your neighbor. A community where we look after one another. That's part of the reason why I think they come to small towns like this in the summertime. So they can pretend that they live in a place where people actually care about them. That's why I love my regulars. The patch has kept this town alive even during the hard times. And a good portion of the population still makes their living working on the rigs, watching the pumps, and maintaining the fields. And this gas station is always their first stop in the morning, and usually their first stop when they get back into town. I make conversation with all of them as they get the snacks or sandwiches for the day, and fill the thermoses with hot coffee or soup that I make in the wintertime. And it's not small talk either. They tell me how work is going, which kid lost their first tooth, which wife is having a baby soon and what they're thinking of naming it, or which husband has been spending too much time at the bar rather than looking for another job. They talk to me like I'm their friend, because I am. And at night, they roll in after a hard day because they know that the coffee is freshly made at 6 p.m. on the dot, and there's always hot burgers for those who are too tired to cook for themselves. I first saw the fog on the morning of the 23rd as I went to work. The sun wasn't quite up yet, as it was 4 in the morning, but I could see it near the edge of town. It was as white as cotton balls, and looked so thick it could have been a cloud. I marveled at it a little at first, thinking it was gonna be one hell of a day once it rolled into town, and I wondered about those that would have to make their morning commute through it. I made it a point to tell each one of my regulars when they popped in that morning to drive safe that I was sure the sun would burn it off probably by mid-morning, and that I'd have hot soup on around 6 as well as burgers. After all, it felt like a soup kind of day. We shared a few laughs, swapped a couple of worst fog I ever seen stories, and one of the younger men in town made a reference I didn't quite understand about a video game where a whole town is constantly covered in fog. I told him that the last video game I played was Super Mario Bros. He laughed, called me old school, then said maybe he could show me some of the new technology sometime. I said that maybe we could do that, but for now he should concentrate only on getting to work safe and getting home safe. After all, he had a wife that was 7 months along. They was gonna have a boy. The morning rush passed, and the rest of that day went the same as many of the others, with customers trickling in for some odds and ends, and some of the fellas coming by just to chew the fat. I had a bad feeling once 7 p.m. came and went, and I hadn't seen any of my regulars. Even on bad weather days, I could always expect to see around half of them. However, seeing as that fog hadn't moved the entire day, not dissipating or rolling into town like I had originally thought it would, I just figured that they had all had a stressful drive out, a miserably wet day, and an equally stressful drive back into town. So maybe they all just decided to head home. I hadn't heard any sirens that day, so that was a good sign, and I figured if there had been an accident, I would have heard talk about it by now. So I closed up the shop at 10 after storing away the soup and headed home. I figured I'd portion out the soup tomorrow morning and give 'em all a free thermos full. The next morning, however, that fog hadn't moved, and I didn't see any of my regulars. Instead, I saw their family members or friends. They each came in asking if their people had stopped in the night before. When I answered no, they told me that they hadn't come home either. I had a hard time believing that. Over 200 people worked out of town every day, and I couldn't comprehend how not one of them had come back into town last night. The people who came in said they were heading out to look for their loved ones, and although I suggested that maybe we wait or ask Sheriff Roberts if he could organize a search, I knew my words were falling on deaf ears. I don't blame them. If it was one of my kin missing, I wouldn't have listened to me either. But I never had any kids of my own, and Maria passed away 30 years ago, and I never could bring myself to remarry. That was also the morning that we learned that the phones were out, as well as the internet. Got a lot of traffic through the store that day, as the station has always been a kind of meeting place for the folks of Graydon. I learned that none of the people who went looking for their friends and family came back the following day when Mayor Grayson came to pay me a visit and tell me about the town meeting. That totaled over 300 people that had disappeared in 2 days. "It doesn't make any sense, Earl," he said to me. "How the hell does not one person come back? And why hasn't that fog moved? Do you know that it surrounds the town?" he asked me. "Yeah, I took a drive yesterday after I closed the store," I told him. "Couple people had mentioned they could see it from where they lived, and they live on opposite sides of town." "How is that possible?" he asked. "I have no fucking idea, Dave," I answered. I never called him Mayor or Your Honor. We had grown up together, so he was always Dave to me. "What you gonna say at the meeting?" I asked. "Sheriff Roberts recommended that I suggest no one leave town until we know what's going on with that fog. He even brought up the idea of posting deputies at each road leading out of town to make sure." "I'm not sure that's the best idea, Dave. You know people around here." "I know, Earl," he cut me off. But what the hell am I supposed to do? Over 300 people have left town and not one of them has come back. I'm trying to protect the ones who are left until we know more. There could be poison in that fog or something. Jesus, I hope not, I said. And I know you mean well, Dave, so tell them what you just told me. Be the neighbor, not their elected official. I think Sheriff Roberts is right, and that we should all stay put, so I'll be there at your meeting, and I'll second you on whatever you say. Thanks, Earl, he said. That means a lot. People tend to listen to you. Sometimes not as well as I'd like, I replied, thinking of all those who had left yesterday, even though I had suggested that they not. I thought Dave was getting ready to take off after I agreed to be at his meeting, but he looked as though he still had something on his mind. What you thinking about, Dave? Your face is doing that scrunchy thing. Nothing really. Just something strange Jerry said this morning, he responded. Jerry was his 7-year-old grandson. He and his mama had come back home to live with Dave and Sherry after the piece of shit she married got himself locked up for selling meth. I invited Dave to continue with a grunt, and he did. Jerry said he walked out through the woods into the backyard and got close to the fog. Jesus, his mother nearly skinned him alive when he told her this. Once I calmed her down, Jerry said he heard something out there. When I asked him what, he said he thought he could hear people moving around in the fog. He said he called out, but no one answered. Told us he ran away when it sounded like someone walked right up to the spot where he was, but that the fog was so thick he still couldn't see anyone. Kid's imagination, I said dismissively, but the hair on my arms was standing up a bit. Yeah, probably, Dave conceded. I'll see you tonight, Earl. Speaking of that meeting, it's about time I got ready for it. I'll continue this afterwards. Later. The meeting went about how I expected. People weren't very happy about being asked to stay put, while a lot of them still had friends or family missing. But with the mayor, the sheriff, and myself all agreeing that this was the best course of action, they heeded our advice. Afterwards, Sheriff Roberts told me that he wasn't getting anything on the radios either, that he was thinking about tying a rope to one of his deputies and putting one of their gas masks on him, see if he could walk out into the fog and come back. If it worked, then maybe they could put something like a search together. I told him it sounded like as good an idea as any other. I'm gonna head to bed now. I'll write more in this as the situation continues. March 27th, 2025. I don't even know where to begin on what's happened over the last 2 days. It's late. Things have calmed down as I write this entry. I still have the blood of some of my neighbors on my clothes, but I felt that I need to write this down while it's all still fresh in my mind. I'll wind this back to the morning of the 26th. I went to the station to open up mainly out of habit, but also to try and keep a sense of normality for people who see the station as a staple of the town. As I was stepping out of my truck, I could hear gunfire in the distance. Going against my better judgment, I got back into the truck and drove in the direction that I thought it was coming from. Graydon's not that big of a place, so it didn't take long to reach the southern road out of town, and what greeted me once I got there was nothing short of chaos. There was a deputy lying on the ground unmoving. Dave and Sheriff Roberts was standing at the edge of the fog, another deputy keeping a restraining hand on the mayor's forearm. Dave was screaming Sherry's name over and over again, and a tight ball formed in my stomach as I approached the scene. As I passed by the man lying on the ground, I glanced down at him and took a step back as I saw the mangled state of his face. It looked as if his skull had been bashed in from the front, leaving a concave impression in his head. I must have let out a sound of disgust because Sheriff Roberts turned in my direction. His face was pale and his eyes were wide, the face of a man who was nearly terrified to the point of panic. "Jesus, Earl," he said. "What are you doing here? You all right?" "Yeah," I stammered. "I heard the gunfire. Was concerned. What happened here, Dwayne?" "Let's get the mare back to the station," he said, and then turned to the two other deputies that were on the scene. "You two, can you get Randall seen to?" he asked as he gestured towards the body on the ground. "Of course, sir," one of them replied. "Are you gonna tell his wife?" "Yep," Robert said with a sigh. "I'll tell her what happened. That he died in the line of duty, protecting one of our own." The two deputies nodded, both looking relieved, and I don't blame them. I can't imagine making one of those visits to the home of a fallen officer. I can't imagine how hard that must be to be the bearer of that news. It took a minute to get Dave moving, but eventually we did. I knew Sheriff Roberts would fill me in on what happened once we got back to the station, but in reality I had pieced together most of it already. The only thing I didn't know was who or what was responsible. Who could have hit Randall so hard that it shattered his skull? I got my answers once we were at the station. Dave had calmed down a little by the time we arrived there, but Roberts did most of the talking. Earlier, Tiffany Daniels, one of the people who had gone missing on the first day, had kicked the door in of Dave's home. The family responded to the commotion downstairs, well, with the exception of Jerry, with Dave's daughter Brandy being the first to approach Miss Daniels. I'm assuming it was out of desire to protect her son and the shock that caused her to approach Tiffany without considering that this 120-pound woman had just kicked in a pretty solid oak door. But unfortunately, Brandy didn't get the chance to reflect on that fact. When she tried putting her hand on Miss Daniels to possibly restrain her, the other woman had backhanded Brandy. The blow apparently took her off her feet and sent her flying a couple yards back, her body landing in a heap, her head twisted in an unnatural angle. Dave had run to his daughter, yelling for his wife to run back upstairs to their grandson, but as he checked on Brandy, he heard Sherry scream in pain briefly and then give out a garbled yelp. When he looked back up, he saw Miss Daniels walking back towards the front door, dragging his wife. He said that the front of Sherry's pajama shirt was covered in blood, and that it looked like Miss Daniels' fingers had punctured through the skin of Sherry's body, and that the other woman was dragging her away by her collarbone. Dave said her eyes were still open, but she wasn't making any sounds. I imagine she was likely in shock. The mayor had retrieved his gun from his study before giving chase, yelling out for Sheriff Roberts, seeing as their neighbors. I had a little trouble following the next part, and Sheriff Roberts seemed to have trouble explaining it. He said that although it appeared that Tiffany Daniels was only walking, that he and Dave couldn't catch up to her even though they were running at damn near a dead sprint. Dave had taken a shot at her with his 9mm, but he had missed. Knowing that he had deputies in the area, Sheriff Roberts had started calling out to any who might be within shouting distance, seeing as the radios were still on the fritz. A squad car had pulled up to Miss Daniels as she was reaching the edge of town, and Randall and two others had gotten out. Randall had tried approaching the woman, his gun drawn, telling her to release Sherry Grayson or they would be forced to open fire. Dave cried out for them to just fucking shoot her, and as Randall looked towards his voice, Miss Daniels had moved with shocking speed, punching him in the face with her left hand, shattering his skull with a single blow. The other deputies had opened fire then, but Roberts told me that although he had seen the bullets landing home and had even shot her in the back twice himself, she didn't even react to being hit. She just continued along her way until she and Sherry had disappeared within the fog. There was more gunfire that night, and more screams. By the time the sun rose on the 26th, 25 people had been taken, all of them reportedly by our former neighbors who had disappeared. The 2 deputies that had been with Dave and Sheriff Roberts had vanished as well, along with the bodies of Randall and Brandy. Witnesses who saw the people, who had come back from the fog, all reported that they looked different than before, that their skin appeared gray with a greenish tint, and that on many of them it appeared to be almost melting off of their bodies. They said it looked baggy, like the bodies of drowning victims that have remained in the water too long, and in some cases was hanging off of them in strips. Those who tried to engage them all confirmed what Dave and the sheriff had claimed about bullets not seeming to bother them, although Greg said he had caused one to stumble by shooting him in the leg. It was decided that we should group as many people as we could in as many houses as possible to keep track of them and not allow them to become isolated, while all those who owned firearms and could use them would form a kind of militia to patrol the streets in case those things came back the following night. The idea was to aim for their legs or send a mass with high calibers to maybe knock them down. However, when nightfall finally came, we fared no better than the night before. I can only personally account for the group of 15 that I was with, but I don't think anyone accomplished any more than we did. They came when the sun went down, which seemed to happen sooner than it should have, and for a moment we froze when we saw them. There were 7 in total in the group we encountered, and if they had looked strange the night before, they looked truly inhuman now. Some of them appeared almost lizard-like in appearance, with large eyes that reflected our flashlight beams back at us like animals, their skin frayed and parts of it scaly. Arms had grown longer than a normal person should be, almost looking more like an ape than a man. One of them in front of the group had a large misshapen head that looked like a soccer ball that had been kicked too many times. Its skin was a dark shade of green, large round eyes upon its horrific face, a mouth that gaped open full of large square teeth. Its legs were bent backwards at the knee like a dog's, long arms nearly touching the street. They moved almost in complete silence, not appearing to be in a hurry, not seeming to pay us any mind, even though we were no more than 50 feet away from them by the time we opened fire. "All right, boys," Sheriff Roberts cried out. "Let's light these fuckers up." He shot first, taking the thing with the misshapen head directly in the chest with his .45. It stumbled back a step, and this gave the rest of us the confidence to open up, firing at will. The group rushed us then. The thing with the long arms and lumpy head closed the distance first, propelling itself along using the knuckles on its long arms like an ape would charge. It leapt from a distance of 7 feet away and latched on to the sheriff, wrapping its legs around his waist like a long-lost lover, yanking his head back by his hair with its left hand. It thrust its own head forward, large mouth open, and clamped its teeth onto Robert's lower jaw. The thing jerked its head back, ripping the sheriff's jaw clean off. Blood sprayed, and the creature spit the jawbone out like it was a piece of gristle. And then, still holding Robert's head back by his hair, it shoved its right arm down his throat, pulling it back out a moment later, holding the man's heart in its hand. The fucking thing was laughing the entire time, in a high-pitched, shrill laugh that I'll hear in my head even if I live to be 1,000 years old. It popped the bloody organ into its mouth and began chewing with what sounded like satisfaction. I turned away and retched. I couldn't help it. The sounds of gunfire were lessening as the men around me were overrun. I was knocked to the ground by something, my head striking the pavement, and the world went black for a little while. When I woke a couple hours ago, it was over for the night. Regrouping with some of the others and taking stock of what had happened, it was estimated that about 30 people had been taken. 20 had died in the fighting. I estimate that only leaves a little over 200 people left in Graydon. The others that had been out there all reported seeing much the same as I did. People who were no longer people. Some that looked reptilian. Others that almost looked like they were made out of branches, tree bark, something. A few that looked like their flesh had melted, almost giving them the appearance of slugs with extra limbs poking out at random spots of their grotesque bodies. When I voiced my confusion over why I had not been taken while unconscious, others said they had witnessed the things from the fog walking past some people, as if they didn't see them, only to take someone standing behind them, or hiding in one of the houses. I got word later that Dave had shot himself after watching his grandson Jerry walk away with a group of them into the fog willingly, crying out his mama's name as if he had heard her calling out to him. We've decided instead of grouping together, we should all try hiding separately when the sun goes down tomorrow. Fighting them didn't work. Maybe hiding will. I honestly don't know what to do, so it sounds like as good a plan as any. March 28th, 2025. I walked out to the edge of town this morning. I'm not sure why. I think it's 'cause I woke up thinking about what Dave had said his grandson had told him, that he had heard people moving around in the fog. Maybe I wanted to listen for myself. Maybe I just wanted a closer look at the fog itself. I'm honestly not sure. I stood there, staring at it, thinking to myself that it looked more like a cotton blanket than a cloud. How it was utterly impossible to even see the silhouette of the trees through it. I briefly wondered what would happen if I walked into it. What would I see? How far did the fog go? Would it be possible to escape to the other side of it? Or was the world outside already gone? And I did hear something, but not the sounds of people walking around in the fog as Jerry had described. Instead of that, I heard something big moving around within the fog. I could feel its footsteps vibrate the ground and could hear trees being pushed aside and falling. When I strained my ears, I thought I could hear breathing. But high above me, like something was standing right on the other side of that fog, staring down at me. Why are you doing this? I asked no one in particular. What is this? I didn't receive an answer, and I didn't expect one. But I did wonder about the thing that appeared to be staring at me. And I'm almost sure it wasn't my imagination that it was there. I wondered if it was one of our neighbors who had changed into some hulking monstrosity, or if it was something else. Maybe it was the thing that brought the fog in the first place. Maybe the ones that it had changed were feeding it. Please, leave us in peace. We never did anything to you. We don't even know what the fuck you are. So please, leave us in peace. Again, I received no answer. Not even so much as a sinister laugh like in a horror story. There was only that deep breathing and the feeling of eyes upon me. I backed away to my truck and headed home to bunker down in my basement for the night. March 30th, 2025. Over the last 2 nights, 100 more people have been taken. Hiding in our homes has not helped us any more than trying to fight the things that come out of the fog did. They crashed through windows, busted down doors. A couple of the motherfuckers even came through the goddamn walls and still took whoever they wanted while passing others by. The things my neighbors have witnessed and described to me now sound like something straight out of the fever dream from a lunatic. Creatures that don't even resemble how I imagine life could exist. Masses of flesh with teeth shambling along the streets, screaming people stuck to the surface of its body. Monsters that could only be described as demons, racing along rooftops, dropping on people and carrying them away. Heads sprouting from the goddamn ground, shrieking at us like an alarm, alerting the other seeking creatures to our presence. It's almost like the fog has warped nature itself, and with it the days as well, as the days are getting shorter now only lasting about 6 hours before night descends on us again. And with the night, the creatures come, and more of us disappear. God help us. April 3rd, 2025. There's maybe 75 of us left now. Most have been taken, but maybe a dozen people have walked out into the fog of their own volition. Daytime only lasts a few hours now, giving us only a brief respite before the monsters come again, picking out some of us as if we were the fall harvest, and saving the rest for later. We've decided to take up arms and confront the things from the fog again tonight. Only this time we plan on fighting until the last. None of us want to hide anymore and wait to be taken. If we're gonna die, we'd rather die on our feet. I have no explanation to offer about what happened here, or why. I'm hoping that if anyone ever finds this journal, maybe you'll find those answers for us. Maybe one day you'll figure out what happened to the people of Graydon, Wyoming, before this happens somewhere else. This journal was discovered by Officer Brent Chambers of the Douglas Police Department in the town of Graydon, Wyoming. Diane Mathers, whose mother was a resident of Graydon, had contacted the Douglas police and reported that she could not get through to her mother on the phone, and when trying to call the Graydon Sheriff's Department to perform a welfare check, she had received only a busy signal. As Douglas, Wyoming was the closest town to Graydon, Officer Chambers was dispatched at 3:45. He arrived at Graydon around 5 p.m. and went directly to the sheriff's office, only to find it empty. A cursory search of the town revealed much of the same. By 8 a.m. the next day, officers from the surrounding towns of Douglas, Casper, and Glenrock had arrived in Graydon to begin a search for the missing citizens or evidence of what had happened to them. The discovery of Mr. Earl Hendrix's journal has led to much confusion amongst the investigators, as the town does not bear the damage one would expect from the events described within, nor was the fog reported in the journal seen anywhere else in the surrounding areas. Along with that, the dates are equally puzzling, as Officer Chambers was dispatched to Graydon on March 24th. And the final date within the journal is April 3rd. The idea of a hoax has been suggested, but the motivation for such makes as little sense as the complete disappearance of over 600 people. The investigation is still ongoing. Thank you for joining us here at Nightmares Incorporated, and we hope to see you again next week when we bring you another original story. Until then, sweet dreams.